Thank you so much. We have experts today from the Marshall Project, the Data Liberation Project slash MuckRock, and we also have the founder and director of Prisons Ban Books Week here today to talk about prison book bans. And we're really excited for this session, and we've had a ton of signups, and so we're excited for all of you to be here with us today. As I mentioned, it's recorded, and we'll send around the link. Look out for an email from me after this session with both the link to the recording and a link to a tip sheet with a lot of the different links that we reference in this session today and different resources as well. And if you have any questions as we're going along, feel free to throw them in the Q&A below. We'll be paying attention to them and we'll be stopping at a couple of different points throughout our conversation today to address different questions. And then at the end, we'll also have time for questions. So yeah, don't hesitate to throw your questions in there. Um, and yeah, before we dive into the session today, I'll talk a bit about MuckRock and the Data Liberation Project. But so for a little background on me, I'm the director of training and enablement here at MuckRock, and what that means is that I do a lot of these sessions. Some of you might have seen me or seen my name pop up in your inbox before, but I do a lot of these different training series, including investigating with sunlight, which is this session today, helping Dillon out with FOIA Friday and building with MuckRock. And we also do custom training sessions. We can do those for your organization. They can be on different topics, including things like FOIA 101s, investigative skills, help with public records research and data-driven research. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I can put my email in the chat if you're interested in a custom training for your organization. But for a bit about MuckRock, MuckRock was founded back in 2010 to support journalists, researchers, and the public in general in filing public records requests. We have the mission of promoting transparency and civic participation. Some of you maybe were maybe attended or were aware we were just at Sunshine Fest and helped to co-host Sunshine Fest the past couple of days. So if you were there, thank you. Yeah, FOIA and find out. Dillon is wearing the shirt from Sunshine Fest. Um, and so we have a ton of different things that we work on. Some of them are, we build and maintain various tools. Those include Document Cloud, and this is document analysis and hosting platform that's used by thousands of newsrooms. We also have a records request service. It's called MuckRock Requests. That makes it really easy to file and track public records requests through our editorial section, which is where Dillon and I fall. We collaborate with other outlets to do records-driven work with impact. And we also adopted the Data Liberation Project, which is an initiative to identify, clean, document, and publish government data sets that are of public interest. And so, yeah, Dillon Bergin, who is here with us today, will be talking all about the work that the DLP has done with prison book bans and how you can get involved in that work. So there'll be more of an intro about Dillon later, and we'll get to chat more about the DLP later as well. There's also the Sunlight Research Desk. This allows newsrooms to provide their communities with fact-based, transparent, investigative journalism that holds power to account. Sunlight Research Desk supports newsrooms through research support, different workshops, reporting recipes and tools, and peer-to-peer support network. So yeah, if you're interested in learning more about any of MuckRock's different tools or community or resources, please don't hesitate to reach out. And here are just some of, MuckRock by the numbers. Through MuckRock requests, we filed over 172,000 requests and seen over 11.8 million pages released. But now, yeah, I'll pass it over to Annie to do some more intros.
Thank you so much. And hi, everyone. It's really nice to meet you. I'm Ana Mendez, and I am product manager at the Marshall Project. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit news organization that seeks to create and sustain a sense of national urgency about the U.S. criminal justice system. We have an impact on the system through journalism, rendering it more fair, effective, transparent, and humane. My colleague, Michelle Billman, is with me today, and Well, she'll explain a little bit more about our role in this topic, as she leads one of our really wonderful initiatives, Investigate This, and we have a whole toolkit around reporting on banned books. But today we are also joined by two brilliant people, Moira Marquis, and Dillon Bergin. Moira will be talking to us about the PEN America report on prison censorship, the history and contemporary landscape of book bans, content that's been historically banned, types of content that is banned now. So we're really excited to jump into that. Moira is the founder and director of Prison Banned Books Week, an annual campaign that raises awareness of prisons as the largest censors in the United States. She has a PhD in English from UNC Chapel Hill and is the author of the PEN America Report, Reading Between the Bars, an in-depth report on carceral censorship. Her book, Thought Threats, Carceral Censorship in America, is forthcoming from UNC Press, and she has organized with prison book programs for almost 20 years. Um, Dillon will be joining us again from MuckRock, and he'll be walking us through a little bit of his FOIA request work. Um, Dillon is the senior investigative and data journalist who uses data and public records to power investigative reporting with partner newsrooms. He's also the director of the Data Liberation Project, hosts FOIA Fridays, which Elizabeth mentioned. Um, Dillon was a member of the Documenting COVID-19 team, a project funded by MuckRock and the Brown Institute for Media Innovation. Before that, he was a Report for America Corps member with Searchlight New Mexico and a Fulbright Germany journalism fellow. Um, and I'll speak a little bit more about Michelle in a second. But Moira, please take it away. We're really excited to hear more.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Annie, and hi, everyone. Today, we're going to learn some interesting information about how you can uncover what prisons censor, but it is interesting to think about how and why prisons censor. Prisons are deeply security-oriented institutions. They're surrounded by razor wire. They have people with machine guns. So why is it that literature and information are so targeted? And it turns out that this practice has a very, very long history in American carceral institutions. So early American ideas of criminality before the first prison were very much informed by inherited colonial cultural beliefs, mostly Protestant, drawn from the direct idea that what you read could have a direct, it was a window into your soul, really. So people who engaged in good reading, which mostly was the Bible and a small cache of very selected Christian texts that were presumed to have the correct moral orientation. If people read those things, they were presumed to be good people. If they read other things, for example, novels, poetry, secular works of history, that was often considered evidence that the person was capable of doing harm. So just one example is this flyer from Boston in 1721, where a man was charged with killing his wife. And he was interviewed by the Puritan minister Cotton Mather, who had played a significant role in the Salem witch trials. And the condemned man's reading materials played a very significant role in the evaluation of his guilt. So Mather asked him, what have you been, spending your time these months while you've been waiting for your trial? And the man replied, I've been reading. Mather looked around his cell, saw that there was no Bible, and this was evidence that he had been engaged in leisure reading. And in fact, the man responded that yes, he had been reading history and poetry, and this person was executed. This wasn't isolated at all. In 1772, another man convicted of rape told a minister that he had, quote, confined his reading to history and books of diversion. And this was seen by the court as an explanation of why he had committed the crime that he had committed. During the First Great Awakening, which roughly spanned from the 1730s through the 1770s, there was also a very heavy emphasis on a detained person's reading habits as indication of their penitence and their spiritual preparedness for death. So narratives from that period frequently mention what people read and drew connections between their reading habits and the actions that they were criminalized for. This continued on into American history and the building of the first prison in America, which Elizabeth, if you could advance the slide, that would be great. So the first modern prison built in America was Eastern State Penitentiary outside of Philadelphia, which opened in 1829. It took its name, the penitentiary, from the Christian concept of penitence. And as you can see from the building, it was built according to the Scottish philosopher Jeremy Bentham's idea of the panopticon. And this was a kind of physical structure that was designed to isolate people from themselves and from other people and anything that would contaminate them. So you can see that these single cell corridors extend out from a central guard tower. People were alone in their solitary cells. They couldn't view another person. They couldn't speak to anyone, but they were under constant surveillance through the central guard tower, which prevented any sense of privacy. So their actions, their words were all visible and judged by their jailers. Bibles were the only permitted reading material, and only clergy had permission to visit and speak with the people inside. They couldn't write their families. They couldn't see their families. And even the guards who delivered their food and the piecemeal work that they were expected to perform while imprisoned were not allowed to talk to them. So this was part of the whole system that was designed to, what people believed would be affect an inner transformation of a person. This ultimately proved too expensive. And in New York, where the next prison was built, people were kept in double cells and they worked outside of their cells, but still the system really focused tightly on controlling who people could speak with, what they could read, and what they could write, including in personal correspondence. So although a lot of this has varied since 1867, across time, in 1867, a Virginia judge ruled that prison wardens had complete authority to determine what people who were imprisoned could read, write, speak, and not only First Amendment rights, but all rights, actually. So there was no judicial oversight beginning from 1867 up until the 1960s and 70s. And Elizabeth, if you could go to the next slide. So in the 1960s and 70s, incarcerated members of the Nation of Islam began to file court cases that challenged prison's paternalism of reading and thinking. And Martin Sostre, who's pictured here and was imprisoned in New York, brought and won 5 of the most influential court cases that made it harder for prisons to deny incarcerated people reading materials. Some of these cases were based on the 14th Amendment, but most of them revolved around the First Amendment right for people to have free expression, including free religious expression, and the right to petition the government if their rights were denied. So these rulings forced carceral authorities to have some degree of accountability and allowed for a kind of blossoming of reading materials inside. This is also the time when prison book programs were founded. And prison book programs, if you don't know, are all volunteer nonprofits that send free books to imprisoned people in every US state. There are now over 40 of these across the country, and I really encourage you to connect with your local prison book program. Sadly, Sostre's legal wins was very short-lived. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. So in 1987, the Supreme Court ruled that prisons have the right to censor anything that they determine is either a threat to the security of the institution or the rehabilitation of the imprisoned person. And this has made prison censorship soar once again. So this graphic is just book denials in the state of Texas from 1980 through 2009. And you can see after the Supreme Court ruling in 1987, how it just markedly increases. However, the Supreme Court ruling did not require that prisons track or report the censorship they engage in. For this reason, over half of all of the 52 carceral jurisdictions in America don't keep records of the literature and information that prisons deny people. They're not public. Only California has recently passed legislation that requires the publication of specific titles to be made available. So in order to know what books and literature are banned, you have to file Freedom of Information Act requests. And next slide, please, Elizabeth. In 2003, while at Penn America, my intern Juliana Luna and I filed FOIA requests to all state prison systems, the District of Columbia and the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Our goal was what your goal is here today, for transparency. And what we discovered, we published in this report, Reading Between the Bars, which you can read online. But here are some of the top takeaways that we found. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. So the current ban titles includes overwhelmingly innocuous and utilitarian information like dictionaries, medical information, things that could not possibly be a threat to a prison or an individual's rehabilitation. I have a PhD in literature, like Annie said, and I disagree with the idea that reading makes you a better person. I've read a lot of books. I don't think it has improved me tremendously. I also don't think it can make you a worse person. But the titles on these lists are overwhelmingly not even something that someone who does believe that reading could make you better or worse could reasonably argue would affect your character. So why do judges go along with this? It's because they overwhelmingly have deference to carceral authorities because of the Supreme Court case. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. The most troubling thing is the marked increase from about 30% of carceral institutions to now 80% of carceral institutions are engaging in something that doesn't have to do with content at all. It's called content neutral censorship. And it's basically where they limit the vendors that a person who is incarcerated can purchase from. So this is a screenshot of the Michigan DOC website on incoming publications. And you can see that there's only a handful of places where people can purchase materials. They cannot accept free books. They can't accept donated books. They can't get books from churches or other places that they don't have to pay for. Other examples are even more extreme. So like Missouri, for example, in 2023 implemented the strictest to date policy, which lets imprisoned people order from only one retailer, a company owned by a former corrections officer. They have to purchase their books through their caseworker. They have to pay for the literature themselves through their commissary account, which charges fees, and when people from the outside make deposits into it. Since the end of just January of this year in 2026, South Carolina is attempting to ban all paper literature. Arkansas also attempted to ban all paper literature, but this is in the process of being rescinded because there was a really robust local pushback. And Texas is currently trying to prevent imprisoned people from receiving used books, which would eliminate donated books provided for free by prison book programs. They claim that these are needed in order to prevent contraband, but as we can see from the long history of censorship in America, there's likely a different motivation, and this is one that is supported by a lack of evidence that paper mail is actually a conduit of contraband into prisons and jails, which we can talk about more if people are interested in the Q&A. And I'll turn it over to Annie for Dillon.
Great. Thank you so much, Moira. That was amazing. We can take a very brief moment to answer maybe one or two questions right now, if anybody has any. And if not, I can ask one question and then we can move on. Okay, I don't think I'm seeing any questions coming up. Elizabeth, are you seeing anything on your end? No. Okay. Before we move forward, Moira, I would love to hear a little bit more about what aspects of prison book bans do you wish journalists would investigate more often or more thoroughly? If you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking this. I think, as my final comment may have alluded to, we definitely need more information about contraband. This is very hard to FOIA. When I have tried to do it, I have gotten back paperwork that's heavily redacted. And a lot of what they're claiming is that people's privacy is being infringed by revealing this information, which, as we know, there's so much public information available already about people, their identities, what they've been accused of, and everything that's happening inside. So it's a little specious, this claim, but I would love for people to do FOIA requests on contraband because they're trying to enforce these bans unilaterally based on this, and just revealing the numbers would go so far to invalidating these claims for the public.
Thank you. And it seems like we are getting a follow-up on that. Can you talk more about the evidence on whether contraband is reduced by book bans? I know the state of Arizona used this claim to push for their policies.
That's a great question. So, like I said, we don't have a lot of before and after to judge this by. The one instance that I know about is Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania implemented mail scanning and a book processing center. So all paper literature has to go through a centralized processing center in Pennsylvania. It takes many months for the literature to get to people inside. They rip apart spines. They, do all kinds of things. The positive drug test rate in Pennsylvania 5 years after those policies were implemented increased. So it is, and Florida published their own literature to justify mail scanning in that state. And when they did, according to their own record keeping, contraband coming in through paper mail constituted under 3% of all contraband instances. So we don't, the problem is that we haven't done the work to really kind of get the numbers to see a wider swath. These are self-reported by state DOCs, right? Voluntarily, but that tells volumes right there that they're bringing out these very low numbers to kind of justify this, but I would love to have more. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And we will have time at the end to do some more questions and answers. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So we're now going to pivot for just a moment, and my colleague, Michelle Billman, is going to tell us a little bit about the Marshall Project's Banned Books Toolkit, which is meant to help journalists dig into this kind of work. Michelle coordinates the Investigate This initiative for the Marshall Project, which shares data and other tools with local newsrooms and researchers to support accountability journalism. Before this role, she managed small public radio newsrooms in North Carolina and Nevada, where she trained several dozen early career journalists in college and high school. She's also served as a mentor for NPR's Next Generation radio program, and she is a stellar colleague. So I'll hand it over to Michelle.
Thanks so much, Annie. And I think if Elizabeth, if you want to advance the slides, that would be great. Okay, yeah. So this is the just beautiful illustration for our Investigate This project, which, like Annie mentioned, our goal is to take all the resources, all the data that Marshall Project journalists are gathering in the course of their investigative reporting and then figure out how to design and package it so that it's most useful to local newsrooms. And coming from a local newsroom, I know that can be a real challenge because people are strapped for time, and they need something that they can really like plug right into their workflow. So that's something we're always looking to do. If you want to jump to the next slide. And so the Marshall Project, since it launched like a decade ago, has been committed to showing other journalists and researchers, like pulling back the curtain to say, this is how we pulled off this investigation. These are the tools we use. These are the data points that we collected. They've been doing that in various forms over the years. But in 2023, when they were investigating carceral book bans, they really sort of like leveled up in this amazing way where they created this entire toolkit to help other newsrooms and researchers figure out how to raise awareness of this issue, how to cover it, how to really dig into it. And they had a bunch of user research conversations. My colleague Annie led that effort. She's going to talk to you about it in just a minute. But in addition to like doing their own reporting, they were talking to other stakeholders to figure out like how can we share this in a meaningful way and how can we design something that newsrooms can pick up and use easily. And they did that, and dozens of newsrooms were able to use these tools to help raise awareness and sort of bring this issue, I think, into the spotlight. And so these are the tools listed on this slide that they created within this toolkit. And I'll share the toolkit in the chat in just a moment. But they did find data. They were able to collect data for 19 states. And they put it into an embed that is like a searchable table that a newsroom could then embed on their website, which was really useful because then users and audiences can really look through the database themselves and see what books are banned and sort of have their own reactions to how they feel about those books being banned and if they thought those bans made sense or not. They also collected policy summaries for even more states so that reporters can start comparing policies among states and start trying to figure out where their state falls in this space. There's a sample records request that they encouraged local newsrooms to use, as well as these other tools that are listed here just to kind of round out the reporting process. And then I want to take a quick minute to mention on the right-hand side of the slide, there are just a lot of folks who are involved in the genesis of this project that we just want to make sure we tip our hat to. They, sort of had this brainchild, they brought it to life, and now we are working with MuckRock, with the Data Liberation Project, to try and carry forth their vision into the future. And if you want to skip to the next slide, I'll just mention too, 36 local news stories came out of this toolkit from roughly maybe a 30 or so newsrooms. A couple newsrooms did ongoing coverage, and then it really spanned across digital, radio, television. A lot of folks were able to use this information. And on this slide, you'll just see the types of stories that they told. They really tried to highlight specific titles being banned and then the reactions to those bans. And that included interviewing authors who were impacted by these bans. And some of the authors were formerly incarcerated. So, how disappointing to not be able to distribute your work to your intended audience. They also talked about larger themes of the bans, as well as some updates on policy changes. But this next slide from Andy, I think will go into more detail on what we hope newsrooms can continue doing and maybe elevating this work into the future as we're able to release new data.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Yes, I was fortunate enough to have the tiniest of smallest roles in this important work. As product manager, a lot of my work at the Marshall Project centers around user experience and how we can make our work accessible and what resonates. So a big part of what we did was listen to dozens of stakeholders and get a sense of what it is that felt useful for them. As you can see on the slide, our central question has been, what kind of journalistic work do we want to support, and what do we want people to be able to do? And stakeholders involve non-journalists as well. This also involves people who work in prison education programs, prison libraries. So we had an enormous amount of very meaningful, interesting conversations And some of the insights that came from these conversations is that being able to compare bans across various states was something very useful and actionable. Um, Being able to assess what states have more repressive or constrained policies. That was something that was very useful. Just general tracking um, of changes, what gets worse, what gets better, um, and understanding very particular factors that might be arbitrary that play out across different facilities, um, across different states. There is a component to this that ends up being up to the people who are physically scanning books. There's a very human element to it. So with that, we can hand it over to Dillon to talk to us a little bit more about FOIA work, which is really what allows us to dig deeper into this work. So thank you so much, Dillon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anna and Maura. I'm going to just share my screen and dive right in. First, though, I want to answer a question that was asked in the chat just about kind of general FOIA guidance. What I'm going to talk about in a second maybe assumes some understanding of what public records laws are or what the Freedom of Information Act is. Just very briefly, that's the law that allows you both at the federal level and then the way that it's been modeled at the state level to ask governments or government agencies for the documents and data that they maintain with some exemptions. I've already seen some conversations in the chat about exemptions. That's where things get complicated. But if you're just wondering more broadly about FOIA and don't know a lot about the topic, you can go to this FOIA 101 page. And like we said earlier, we have FOIA Friday, which is a community podcast. Occasionally we have people on to talk about an interesting topic, but a lot of time we're just workshopping requests and answering questions. So you can also join there. But now to the way that you could get involved. If you're listening to everyone talk today and you're like, wow, these people have done amazing work. The thing is, we all want more people to be a part of it. It's not something any one person can do over time. And obviously, there's so many people who are impacted by this country's carceral systems. So this is not just for journalists. This is for really anyone. And for the Data Liberation Project, we like to think of the larger group of people that participate in our work as kind of grassroots investigators. I think it's really also in the spirit of Investigate This and what the Marshall Project is trying to foster. So, yeah, you do not have to be a journalist to join the Data Liberation Project or to be a part of this. The idea behind the Data Liberation Project is that a lot of times journalists gather data that serves a public good, just like the data that we're talking about today. And then they're working on this investigation, and it could take months or years. And in that time span, that data could have been useful to people at any point there. And so the Data Liberation Project is a project of MuckRock to do something that's different than that in the sense that the sole purpose of it is to get that data and make it public as quick as we can for the sole purpose that it's useful to anyone. And therefore, again, we don't just want journalists to be involved. We want anyone who wants to file FOIA requests, who wants to help clean data, who wants to analyze or visualize data, to join in and be part of making, like we're talking about today, these banned book lists public and available to people as long as we can. So that's just a little bit about the Data Liberation Project and kind of the ethos of it. To get involved, one of the first things you can do is join us on Slack. We have a Slack channel where volunteers coordinate, talk about ideas, and plan out the different work that we're doing. So that's the first place to start. For this project specifically, there's kind of three main ways you can get involved, and I'm going to drop some of these links in the chat after. What you're looking at right now is a GitHub repository. If you've never heard of GitHub and you also don't know what the word repository means in this sense, that is totally fine. Bear with me for a second. This is a place where it's easy for a lot of volunteers that help with us to get involved. or it's a place where that's easy for a lot of those volunteers to get involved. But if that's not easy for you, if you've never heard of these things, again, there are lots of different ways to get involved. And right now, I'm just going to kind of talk about those more broadly and not necessarily like you have to know what exactly you're looking at. As long as this generally makes sense, that's enough for now. Um, so I went ahead and started filing requests for these 19 states, for prison systems in these 19 states that Michelle mentioned earlier, and we're getting lists back. Right now, we've gotten lists in all kinds of formats. And as you can imagine from the conversation more broadly today, these aren't made necessarily for the public to use them. They're not made for someone to quickly understand what's going on, what types of books are being censored, why those decisions were made. So they're coming in lots of different formats, and it's great to have them, but we want to eventually build by asking for these lists in these states and possibly more states, a way that it's more accessible for someone to explore this data. So one of the things we need help with, if you're very experienced with working with data, is extracting some of the lists from the formats, the messy formats that they're in. There's a lot of details in this repository or on this link in this page on how to do that. If you have programming experience, that's a great way to get involved. Later on, what we're going to do is get them in a format that's easy to explore for people to look through. So if you're not really interested in the programming part, but you're like, I want to read these lists and get an idea of what's going on and highlight books that I think reporters or any grassroots investigators should go to their local policymakers and ask about. That's another way to get involved. And as we get these lists into a more consumable format, if you're in the Slack channel or you're on our newsletter, you'll see some call outs about that. And that's super helpful as well, because these are long lists. And like Michelle and Anna mentioned earlier, one of the things that the Marshall Project was able to do was go back to authors or help local journalists go back to authors and say, like, hey, look, we found your book on this list. And then also ask policymakers about that. And also then just apply pressure to these prison systems to say someone is watching. You know, we've got the list. You didn't make it public. We actually read through the list. We're seeing these books. We know advanced Spanish grammar is censored on this list. Like, how can you justify that? So that's one way to get involved. And then lastly, if you're interested in filing requests, on the MuckRock site, which I'll show you in a second, we have an organization for the Data Liberation Project. You can join that organization, and you can file more requests in different states. It normally costs to file requests on MuckRock because we have this tool and then we have a support staff that helps kind of on the back end make sure requests get smoothed out. But if you join the Data Liberation Project and you're filing requests about this, all your requests are free. You're just a part of this volunteer group. So everything there is comped and you'll file through our platform. It'll look like this. If you join the Slack channel and you're interested in doing this, we can set up a volunteer group call to kind of coordinate this more so you know a little bit better what you're looking at. But just by way of example, here's one request in Florida. You can see the language I used here. You can also, if you're watching this and you don't want to be involved in the Data Liberation Project, but you're just interested in filing this request in your state or for a specific prison in your state or carceral system, you can go to this link. I'll drop it in the chat. And you can also just copy and paste the language here and put it into an email and file it yourself. All these requests are public. Again, the idea of the Data Liberation Project is that more people participate in transparency, more people push for accountability, and that all the people on this call are just trying to give everyone the tools to be a part of it and collaborate. So you can see here, Florida is one of the states that we've filed to and received data from so far. If you go back to this link, you can see the states where we've already gotten lists from, states we've requested from but haven't received yet. And Florida is one of the ones I included here just to give you an idea of also like what it looks like if you file this request and then you get the list back. You can see, for example, we got it actually in a spreadsheet form. And um, here's a list that includes both approved and rejected, which the states that I have seen have not done that. So it's actually kind of interesting to compare those two, and especially with similar titles, and you actually have dates. So just to give you an idea of what this looks like, this is one of the lists you can see. It's very long. We're still in 2023. And I think this gets at what Moira was saying about just the increase in censorship over time. So, and right here, I just kind of happened to stop scrolling, and you can see Coalition for Prisoners' Rights newsletter has been approved, but um, several volumes have also been rejected over time. So you can immediately start to see the type of decisions that are being made and the way that they affect people who are incarcerated. Um, and I think I'm gonna get close to wrapping up in a second. The last thing I wanted to say, if you don't see a state that you're interested in on this list, or wasn't one of the original 19 states that the Marshall Project requested and that we're helping to get new data for, it could be because you have to go to every single prison in that state and it's not maintained by one larger agency. That is complicated but possible. I'm going to drop this link in the chat. We published a story by a reporter we've been working with for a long time who did that in New York. It's can take a long time, but is very worth it because you can imagine it's just as important to do that when the state has made it very, very difficult for anyone to have an idea of what books are being censored or banned. So I'll stop there for now, and I'm excited to answer any questions.
There are a few questions in the chat, but Dillon, I think it might be helpful if you could tell us a little bit about how, from your vantage point, um, do you think the FOIA landscape has changed during the last year under the second Trump administration, if at all, and if that has anything to do with sort of the responses that you're seeing?
That's a great question, and also something that's been on my mind because, like Elizabeth said, we were just coming back from Sunshine Fest, which is a transparency gathering in DC, where a lot of people who've been working in FOIA for a long time go to talk about what's been happening. In the Washington Post, Nate Jones, a reporter from the Washington Post, just published an article a couple days ago where the Washington Post looked at, I think it's around 300 FOIA lawsuits in the last year, and at least 26 of them cited staffing shortages as the reason for delays or problems in the FOIA process. So from all the data that they showed in that article, and I can drop that in the chat as well, you'll be able to see that like agency after agency, the Doge and Trump administration cuts have really devastated FOIA departments. And if you're filing requests at the federal level, it will take longer than usual to get your answers. But what I think is really important that one of my colleagues at MuckRock told me, his name is Nick Santos. He works at MuckRock now, but he used to be a FOIA analyst for the Coast Guard. I was talking to them about this this past week, and he made the point from his experience working as a FOIA analyst in these agencies that agencies don't like backlogs. And that's what's going to happen right now when people are filing requests and they just don't have enough staff to respond to requests. And that's a good thing because eventually that backlog looks inefficient and people want to get things done eventually, regardless of the administration at the helm. And so the thing that one should be doing right now is not stopping filing FOIA requests because there's less staff and because it'll take a long time. I know it sounds counterintuitive because you're like, well, I'm not going to get anything, or it could be years until I get anything. But for this whole law, for this whole system to continue working, people need to file requests just as they were before. And agencies need to know that they need to hire people again eventually, whenever they can do that, because people are waiting on requests and courts will compel them to respond to requests, even if they don't have anyone on staff to respond to those. So yeah.
Thank you. All right. Well, I think we can jump into some of the questions that we have in the chat. There's one that might be interesting in light of some of what you just said. From Amy, curious on the overlap between the amount of carceral and non-carceral book bans along state lines, regardless of potential differences in titles. I know for non-carceral bans, the top three states are Florida, Texas, and Pennsylvania.
Moira might also have more thoughts on this, but what I'm going to share in the chat is we've been working with the Trans Journalists Association for the last year, who have been filing requests related to banned book bans, which kind of goes along with this. It might be interesting for the person who asked this question as well. But then I'll pass it to Moira.
So the top three states for carceral censorship are Florida has over 22,000, Texas has over 12,000, and the next state is New York, which is a blue state, and California is much less, but is still on there.
Thank you. Moira, this might be a question for you. And I'll frame it in our experience at the Marshall Project and doing some of the listening sessions that we did as we were putting together or designing and iterating on the toolkit, was that there was which I did mention earlier, there was a little bit of an arbitrary nature to how this stuff plays out in practice. So the question we have here is, in addition to the spurious claims of morality, are there elements of meanness or cruelty involved as well? And how do you conceptualize this?
Yeah, I think this is so my answer is based on conversations that I've had with incarcerated people. And as part of the research for the Reading Between the Bars, I asked over 600 incarcerated writers that PEN America has correspondence with on a regular basis to submit personal narratives about their experience of having reading materials denied to them. And some of the responses were truly just heartbreaking. Um, so it's informed by those responses as well as conversations I've had in an ongoing basis with incarcerated writers that I work with for Prison Banned Books Week and other things. As Annie kind of alluded to, the process of censorship in a prison mailroom is pretty capricious. It's an individual going through things. So just like all of us, some days we're tired, some days we're cranky, some days we're, and also it's more difficult for us to work with people who we don't like. And we may do things that are not as generous when interacting with people who, we perceive to have been ungenerous with us. A lot of imprisoned people feel that there is an element of retaliation that occurs when they file an appeal. So, for example, I just on Saturday had a conversation with the recently released Stevie Wilson, who was formerly incarcerated in Pennsylvania. He's the author of Ain't I a Prisoner Too, which is a great essay. I would highly recommend you read it. He told me 300 FOIAs in 2 years, 300 grievances in 2 years, because the PADOC was so relentlessly denying everything that was coming in for him. And he appealed it all the way up to like a central person who was not at the facility he was at, who essentially came back in a kind of rare move, came back to the facility and said, stop doing this. But on the facility level, he was like very much targeted by the staff there. So, I mean, this is supported legally. Like the Supreme Court ruling in 1987, which was called Turner v. Safley, is predicated on individual institutions, wardens' expertise, and they are empowered to make decisions that they feel are appropriate. So the wardens are not acting outside of the scope of their legal rights by denying things to individuals whom they deem to be errant in some way. But so I was very long, complicated, yes.
Great. Thank you for that. It was a very important answer. So thank you for taking the time to go through it. You did speak to this a little bit, but we have a question about the approach. Why does it not make more sense to allow all content, so all books, and monitor what an adult in custody is reading or viewing rather than ban a book on questionable content? Volume of property concerns could still be limited by limits of what is allowed in the housing unit.
I'm not quite sure what is being asked here. Could you read that one more time, Annie? Maybe somebody else could break it down for me.
Yeah, I can read it one more time. Why does it not make more sense to allow all content, um, and monitor on a case-by-case basis, essentially, what each person is reading? The volume concern could be addressed by limits on what is allowed in the housing unit.
So what I think is being asked is why ban like medical books entirely? Why not just ban a medical book for someone, an individual who maybe is expressing an unhealthy interest in, dissection or something? Okay.
So,
So, and then the quantity concerns are, I mean, that's kind of a different thing. The first part, in the Turner v. Safley ruling, the Department of Corrections for the state of Missouri, which is the state that was saying that two imprisoned people, or one person who had been formerly incarcerated and one person who was currently incarcerated, could not engage in correspondence with each other. This was what the case was also, and the Marshall Project has an incredible article on this case. I highly recommend that you read it. They interviewed the still alive judge who, did the initial ruling, and there's lots of personal testimony from both of the, people who brought the case. It's a great article, so please read it. But that case was about preventing two people from having written correspondence with each other. And the state of Missouri effectively said it's too much of an administrative burden to allow imprisoned people to have written communication with each other, because we would need to read every single letter in order to ensure people were not trying to corroborate escape plans, coordinate a mass prison strike, engage in any other kind of collective organizing. And when the court asked the state how many hours a day they engage in currently monitoring mail, the state replied 1 hour a day and said that that was too much of an administrative burden. So the answer as to why they cannot regulate people on a case-by-case basis, first of all, I think that's a really unwarranted degree of micromanagement. As I said, I have a PhD in literature. I've read thousands of books. I do not think that I am a better person for that. I'm just a very much nerdier person for that. But, that case is something that people make a lot. I don't subscribe to it, but essentially that would be an excessive amount of time and the state is already saying that they can't spend an hour a day doing it. That's not going to happen. As far as the quantity of, I've heard, and I mean, this, is various based on institutions, but sometimes people aren't allowed to have books because it's a fire hazard. That's, these kinds of things are very much about control, very much about just like micromanagement and control, and not about legitimate concerns for cleanliness or safety. If we're really concerned about the safety of people inside, there are much greater concerns that we could address immediately right now, including access to healthcare, better food, all medications, like things that are just like much higher on the list than the prison's going to burn down because somebody has 80 books in their cell. So
thank you. This question's for Dillon, and it's sort of in a similar vein, but are there any early takeaways to share regarding the data that you've collected so far?
Yeah, I would say I haven't really spotted any kind of like defining trends. But I just think in the vein of how this work started with Carrie Blakinger at the Marshall Project, I was just looking through the Florida list, and some of the same kind of things that she was highlighting, including her own book. I saw a memoir by someone who was incarcerated that was banned. Again, advanced Spanish book, books about programming, books about making food. These same things, I think are going to come up over and over again, and maybe just keep increasing, like Maura pointed out with the data earlier.
Another question that's related is which US states have taken stronger stances against book bans and could serve as models for others? And if there are any insights on how book bans operate in carceral settings internationally, that would also be great.
Moira, you want to take that one? I think you're best suited. And actually, earlier, that was going to be my question, if I had the time to pitch in a question.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Okay. The United States is the only place, to my knowledge, that actually bans literature for incarcerated people. Um, and I'm getting this from my former intern at Penn, Juliana Luna, who sadly couldn't be on this panel today, but she was the editor of the Human Rights Journal at Columbia as an undergrad. And when she came to the internship at Penn, that was one of the first things she told me. And I was like, what? I can't believe this. As far as states that are better or best, it's not a statewide mandate. As we've been talking about, individual facilities are empowered to, ban at will. And there are no carceral jurisdictions that do not include censorship as part of their policy guidelines. There are some that have much more robust documentation and implementation. So, like, the reason why we know that Florida has so many books banned is because they document it. And they started documenting it in 1992. If all states documented the way Florida does and also had a literature review committee, which Florida does as a central kind of thing, and tracked it, the numbers might look very different. States that engage predominantly in content neutral banning, which is the part that has been exponentially rising in the past 10 years, don't really track that. The only state that tracks that is Idaho. Idaho has a list that will tell you the publisher that a piece came from, but does not tell you the title. And there's no rationale for banning. The only rationale is it came from this publisher, who we don't approve. But that list has only been going for a couple of years. If it continues at the same rate that it has been, it will surpass Florida in a very short number of years, much shorter amount of time than since 1992. So the short answer is there are no good prisons for accessing literature and information. They're all at the whim of carceral authorities, and it varies down to the level of the staff in the prison mailroom. So regardless of what state policy is, you can still have things denied just based on who the warden is and who's working that day.
Okay, I think we're almost at time, so I'll ask one last question to send us off here. But please, everyone know Elizabeth is going to share emails so that if you have any follow-ups, we can be in touch. But this is to the both of you. Do you have any thoughts on the best way to motivate the public to push back against carceral book bans? I feel like you'll both have wonderful thoughts, but probably from very different vantage points.
I think one of the first things I would say as a journalist, probably one of my fundamental beliefs is that if people had the information, if people who were not incarcerated or did not have a loved one who's incarcerated who they tried to get a book to, but looked at some of these books, like the Advanced Spanish or a book about programming and knew, they would realize that large swaths of the population are being censored in this way. So I guess my fundamental belief is the transparency of it, people understanding how, just like Moira was saying, how these books can be banned in such quick and unthoughtful ways and really affect people's lives might change the way that they advocate for it or understand it or function with that information in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Dillon said, and I have the same hopes. I think maybe a more kind of dun 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 point is that the what carceral censorship really reveals to us all, I think, is that being criminalized is a revocation of rights. And the right to speech, to free speech, is the First Amendment because it is the most fundamental right. If we cannot say what we think, protest when we are being treated unfairly, and grieve because we have been treated unfairly, then we're really kind of forced into complicity. We're forced into a complicity with a system that we may not agree with. And so, this brings up a lot right now, I think, because people are being criminalized for things that in the past were, misdemeanors or kind of like more slap on the wrist things. If we can be criminalized for, ever increasing things, then we all risk our rights being rescinded, including our right to talk about it. And that's what happens when you're criminalized, is you cannot discuss in public things. So this is something that the Marshall Project really provides a platform for people who are imprisoned and have been criminalized and are criminalized currently to kind of share their perspective. So does the Prison Journalism Project, which is exclusively reporting and first-person narratives produced by people who are incarcerated. I think, is something that really profoundly affects us all. I don't mean to be too like death knell about it, but I think it's deeply important, which is why I focus so much attention and work on it. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate your thoughtful questions, and thank you to our incredible panelists. It's wonderful to hear you and to see how much you care about such an important topic. So, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for organizing this, all of you. Elizabeth, Michelle, thank you for inviting me. Dillon, thank you so much for all this knowledge and information. Annie, thank you.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
y'all.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, look out for an email with the recording and tip sheet.
Thank you.